I made fun of his tiny hands and feet. What he did next made me hate myself. Hello Reddit. I'm ranting on here because I feel like I can't talk to anyone else. No one understands me and it feels like nobody is on my side anymore. Everywhere I turn people are either blaming me or telling me I was wrong. It's frustrating because I don't think anyone truly understands how things unfolded. And now I just need somewhere to vent. So here I am using Reddit as a soundboard. Maybe it'll help take the edge off. It would also be a plus if I got some advice on how to handle things. I know Reddit isn't the most conventional place to come for advice, but it's a place where people share their stories. And I guess that's what I need right now. I need to get this off my chest, even if it's just into the void. So here goes. My name is Nicole and my husband's name is Arthur. We've been married for about 4 years now. Things between us were always good. I won't sit here and tell you we were perfect or that we had one of those fairy tale marriages you hear about. No, we were just normal. We had our ups and downs like every other couple. But we had something strong, a solid foundation, you know? We always communicated. Always tried to understand each other when we had disagreements. We'd argue like any other couple, but we'd always come back to a place of resolution. It felt like we were a team, like we were in this together no matter what. I guess that's why everything that's happening now feels so surreal. It's like I woke up one day and everything we had built was gone. Like the person I trusted most turned into a stranger overnight. How did we go from being solid to this disaster? Playful banter has always been a big part of our relationship. I guess I always thought it was harmless fun. But sometimes I pushed the boundaries without realizing the emotional toll it took on him. We joke around, poke fun at each other, and I always figured that was just our dynamic. You know how it is, every couple has their thing. For us, it was teasing. He'd tease me about my cooking or how I can never seem to keep a plan alive for more than a week. And I'd joke about his quirks in return. It was lighthearted, or so I thought. I have to admit, Arthur's always had a bit of an insecurity complex. Nothing huge, nothing alarming, just small things. Little quirks that he never openly acknowledged, but that I picked up on over the years. Like how he'd tense up whenever someone made a comment about his height, or how he'd get uncomfortable when people noticed his hands or feet. He was never the type to make a scene about it or let anyone know how much it bothered him. But I saw it even if we never talked about it seriously. Honestly, I didn't think it was a big deal. I figured it was one of those things, you know? We all have insecurities. I've got mine, and I assumed his were no different. Just background noise in the grand scheme of our lives. But looking back, I realized that I was wrong. For him, it wasn't just background noise. It was always there, lurking under the surface. And I was too blind to see how much it weighed on him. Now, if I'm going to rant on here, I feel like I have to be brutally honest, because maybe that's the only way to make sense of this mess. So here it goes. Arthur's appearance has always been a point of contention for me, though I never admitted it out loud to him. Arthur is conventionally attractive, very attractive in fact, but not in the rugged masculine way you might expect. He's handsome in a more delicate, almost feminine way. Sharp cheekbones, soft features, perfectly symmetrical face. Things that people, especially women, would always compliment him on. And you know what? I was jealous, not in an obvious way, not in the sense that it consumed me or that I even let it affect how I treated him on the surface. But deep down, it bothered me. People always commented on how beautiful Arthur was, and over time, I think that started to gnaw at me. I never wanted to acknowledge it, but there was this quiet resentment building inside me, like I felt like I was living in his shadow when it came to appearance. It really is crazy. I mean, no one prepares you for how much it can mess with your head when your partner is more attractive than you, especially when it's not just about looks. It's about the attention that comes with it. First, it's exciting, right? You're with someone who turns heads, someone who other people can't help but admire. It's flattering to be with someone like that. And for a while, I was proud. I felt like I had scored some kind of jackpot with Arthur. But over time, it started to get to me in ways I never expected. The subtle at first, this creeping insecurity. Starts small, like a seed planted in your mind. And before you know it, it's growing into something you can't control. You begin to notice every compliment he gets, every glance that lingers just a little too long when you're out in public. People aren't just seeing him as a person. They're seeing him as this almost unattainable figure, someone with the kind of looks that people stop to admire. It wasn't that I wasn't getting any attention at all, but compared to Arthur, it was like I became invisible. The compliments that used to come my way started to dwindle. And it wasn't even about wanting validation from strangers. It was the fact that he was getting all the attention and I wasn't. That imbalance, that shift in how people saw us as a couple, really started to weigh on me. First, I thought I could brush it off. I convinced myself it didn't matter. But the more it happened, the more I found myself resenting the very thing that drew me to him in the first place. And I guess that's when the joke started, or as I like to call it, playful banter. At the time, I convinced myself it was harmless fun. It seemed like a natural part of being in a relationship, teasing each other every now and then. But in truth, it was far from harmless. I would joke about everything: his height, his hair, his hands and feet, his skincare routine, even his fashion choices. No part of him was left untouched by my need to pick things apart. And as much as I hated to admit it, I never truly confronted the deeper issue. I never talked to him about my feelings because what was I supposed to say? That I was jealous of how attractive he was? It sounded ridiculous to me, even though it was the truth. It started subtly at first. I would find something small and insignificant about him to joke about, like his height. He was on the shorter side, but I knew it wasn't something he could control. Still, that didn't stop me from making it a target. I'd make little jokes almost unconsciously every chance I got, using humor to mask the fact that I was trying to make myself feel better. Then it moved on to his appearance. His hair, for instance, was something I would always pick at and make sarcastic remarks about. His hands became another subject of my jokes. I made fun of them as if that would somehow balance out how I felt in comparison to him. His skincare routine became another target. I was jealous of how flawless he looked, how much effort he put into taking care of himself. So I turned it into a joke. Criticizing his efforts made me feel like I was leveling the playing field, as if tearing him down would somehow lift me up. Even his dedication to fitness didn't escape my relentless nitpicking. He worked hard to stay in shape and I ridiculed it. I'd make sarcastic comments about how much time he spent working out. The more I joked about these things, the worse it got. I began finding fault in everything, even in things as simple as his fashion choices. Whenever he wore something new or tried a different style, I would make comments that made him second-guess his decisions. I would act like I was just being playful so I wouldn't seem jealous. And it wasn't like Arthur hadn't tried to address the issue with me. He did countless times. He would bring it up, sit me down after yet another joke that had clearly crossed the line, and he would try to explain how uncomfortable my comments made him. He told me more than once that he didn't find them funny, that it bothered him when I turned everything into a punchline, especially at his expense. I can't even count the number of times he said, "Can you please stop? It doesn't feel good when you joke about me like that." And yet every time I brushed it off, I would roll my eyes, wave away his feelings like they were just a minor inconvenience, tell him he was being too sensitive. I convinced myself that he was overreacting, that he just couldn't take a joke. I would even throw it back at him saying things like, "Everyone else laughs, so why can't you?" Or "You need to lighten up, it's just playful teasing." The truth is, I didn't want to admit that his words struck a chord with me. Deep down, I knew I was being unfair, that my teasing was more than just jokes. But acknowledging that would mean facing my own insecurities. So instead, I hid behind the guise of humor. I kept telling myself that I was the fun one, that I was keeping things light, and that he was just too uptight. There were even times when he tried to dig deeper, to have a real conversation about it. But I wasn't ready to face what was really going on. He would tell me how it chipped away at his confidence, how it made him second-guess himself in situations where he used to feel self-assured. He even mentioned how when we were out in public, he noticed people laughing at my jokes but glancing at him with sympathy, as if they could see the hurt that I was too blind or too stubborn to acknowledge. He wasn't wrong either, I remember those looks too. But instead of listening to him and hearing how my words affected him, I would double down. I thought that by dismissing his concerns, by laughing them off, I could maintain the upper hand. That I could keep the power dynamic I had created in my head, where I could bring him down to my level through humor. I didn't realize at the time how deeply damaging that was, not just to him but to our relationship as a whole. Every time he opened up to me, every time he tried to tell me that something wasn't right, I shot him down with casual indifference. I made him feel like his discomfort wasn't valid, that it wasn't worth addressing. It was easier for me to blame him for being too sensitive than to accept that I was the one who needed to change. It's one thing to tease someone, but it's another to keep going when they've asked you to stop, when they've told you repeatedly that it hurts. I think things really started to fall apart after that one party. It was just a casual gathering with friends, our usual crowd, nothing out of the ordinary. We'd all had a few drinks and I was in one of those moods where I wanted to be the center of attention. For me, the easiest way to do that was to joke around. If I couldn't be the most attractive person in the room, if I couldn't make heads turn just by being there, I figured I could at least be the funny one. And Arthur, well, he was always my easiest target. He never complained or said a word in public, so I convinced myself it was harmless. I don't even remember exactly what I said that night. Something dumb. Something about his hands. I think I joked that his hands were so tiny it looked like he was holding a toy drink instead of a real glass. It was one of those offhand comments, quick, meant to get a laugh, and people did laugh. I think Arthur even laughed, or at least I told myself that he did. But now looking back, I realize he wasn't really laughing. His face didn't show amusement. There was something else, something I didn't want to see at the time, a crack in the facade. He didn't say anything in the moment. There were no angry words or hurt looks that would have made me stop and think twice about what I'd said. But I felt it. I felt something shift between us that night. It's strange to explain, but when you've been with someone for as long as Arthur and I had, you can sense when something's off, even if nothing is explicitly said. That night, I felt like a small wall went up between us, and instead of addressing it, I brushed it off. I figured I was overthinking it. I mean, how many times had I teased Arthur before? He was used to it, right? So why would that night be any different? But that's where I was wrong. I was too caught up in playing the funny one, too busy trying to impress everyone else, that I didn't realize the effect my words were having on him. Maybe for Arthur, that comment wasn't just another joke. Maybe it was the last straw after years of little jabs, years of me picking at him, chipping away at his self-esteem. After that night, things between us started to shift in a way I couldn't ignore, even if I wanted to. Arthur wasn't talking to me as much. He wasn't laughing with me like he used to. He'd started spending more time by himself, distancing himself from our usual routines. We used to cook dinner together or sit on the couch and watch TV after work. But now he'd retreat to the other room, saying he needed space or that he had something else to do. I couldn't figure out what had changed. In my mind, everything was fine, at least on the surface. But Arthur was different, and I didn't know why. Or maybe I did deep down. Maybe I knew that my constant joking, the teasing that I always thought was harmless, had finally crossed a line. But instead of acknowledging it, instead of asking him if something was wrong, I brushed it off again. It was easier to think he was just in a bad mood or stressed from work than to confront the possibility that I was the cause of the distance between us. More time passed. Things only got worse. Arthur grew quieter, more withdrawn. He stopped trying to have real conversations with me. When I'd ask how his day was, he'd give me a one-word answer. Or worse, he wouldn't answer at all. We were living in the same house, but it felt like we were on two different planets. And as much as I hated to admit it, I still didn't know how to fix it. Instead of talking to him, instead of asking him what was wrong, I kept up the same routine. I continued making jokes even though the laughs had stopped. I kept up the act of pretending everything was okay, even though it wasn't. It was like I was trying to convince myself that if I just ignored the problem long enough, it would go away. But it didn't. One night, a few months after that party, we were sitting in the living room. The silence was really loud. Arthur, for the first time in a while, tried to have a conversation with me. He told me that he couldn't do it anymore. He said that the constant teasing, the jokes, were wearing him down. He admitted that he had tried to laugh along, tried to be okay with it, but it had gotten to a point where he didn't feel like himself anymore. He felt small, diminished, in a way that he hadn't before. And it was because of me. Maybe that should have been my wake-up call, but it wasn't. I apologized in the moment, promised to fix things, and for a few days I really tried. I watched my words more carefully, tried to be kinder, more considerate. But it didn't last. The old habits crept back in, and soon enough, I was belittling him again, sometimes without even realizing it. It was almost like it had become second nature. Then one night, Arthur finally snapped. We were having dinner. It was awkwardly quiet, and I had the not-so-brilliant idea of cracking a joke to lighten the mood. This time, I commented on how his shoes were always the smallest in the room. I thought it was harmless. We'd laughed about it before, or at least I thought we had. But this time, Arthur didn't laugh. He didn't smile or brush it off like he usually did. Instead, he slammed his fork down. For a moment, I just stared at him, stunned. He stood up, and without a glance back, he walked out of the room and left his dinner half-eaten and me sitting there in shock. I didn't move for a long time, just replaying everything in my head, trying to figure out what I'd done. Why had this comment, out of all the things I'd said over the years, been the one to push him over the edge? It wasn't even the worst thing I'd ever said to him. So why now? What had changed? Part of me wanted to run after him, to apologize, to try and fix it. But another part of me, the stubborn, prideful part, held me back. I was too embarrassed to admit that maybe I'd crossed a line and too proud to go after him and say I was wrong. So I stayed there in the uncomfortable silence and finished my dinner. I pretended as if everything was fine. Later that night, I went to bed without a word, hoping that by morning, Arthur would have cooled off. I convinced myself that this was just a minor bump in the road, something we'd get over like we always did. But when the next morning came, the silence between us was even heavier. Arthur barely looked at me as I got ready for work. I knew I should say something, anything, to try and bridge the gap between us. But I didn't. I didn't know how. Instead, I left for work without even trying to have a real conversation. I didn't apologize, didn't ask if he was okay, didn't acknowledge that anything was wrong. I figured he just needed time, and that eventually things would go back to normal. They always had before. But this time was different. Arthur didn't cool off. He didn't bounce back like he always had. Instead, he retreated even further into himself. He stopped completely talking to me, stopped engaging with me in any meaningful way. When I asked him how his day was, he'd give me a curt, one-word answer. When I tried to make conversation, he'd shut it down with short, dismissive responses. There were no fights, no yelling, just silence. It was worse than any argument we'd ever had because there was nothing to work through. Arthur had completely shut down, and I didn't know how to reach him. I wanted to fix things, I really did, but I didn't know where to start. Every time I tried to bring it up, I would lose my nerve. I was afraid that pushing him would make things worse. So I left it alone, hoping that if I gave him enough space, enough time, he would come around on his own. But he didn't. Days turned into weeks, and the distance between us grew wider. I started to feel like I was living with a stranger. The worst part was I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to take back the years of careless words and thoughtless comments. I kept telling myself that things would get better, that Arthur just needed time. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had pushed him too far. I had taken advantage of his patience, his easygoing nature for too long, and now he was done. And yet, even knowing all of that, I still couldn't bring myself to say what needed to be said. I couldn't bring myself to admit that I was the one who had broken us. So I stayed silent, just like Arthur, and we drifted further and further apart. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I got fired. Out of nowhere. I hadn't seen it coming at all. The job I'd gotten, the one I relied on, was thanks to Arthur's connections. So when I got fired, my first instinct was to run to him and complain, expecting him to be there for me, to comfort me, to help fix things like he always did. But when I told him about it, he barely reacted. Instead of the sympathy or support I was looking for, he told me that they said I hadn't been working hard enough. That response hit me hard. I wasn't prepared for it at all. It wasn't what I needed to hear, but I could see he wasn't going to offer more. He was cold and distant, and I didn't know what to make of it. Felt like he didn't care about what I was going through. After that, things only got worse. Without a job, I was at home all the time and had to rely on him. I wasn't good at saving money, and I burned through my savings faster than I expected. Arthur assured me he'd take care of everything financially, and I let myself believe that meant things would be okay. I convinced myself that this new arrangement was working for us, that maybe this was how things were supposed to be for now. It started with the weight gain. At first, it was gradual, just a few extra pounds from stress eating here and there. But being home all the time, isolated and lonely, I turned to food for comfort. It became the one constant in my life. Before I knew it, binge eating had spiraled out of control. I wasn't even enjoying the meals. I ate simply because it was something to do, something to distract me from how miserable I felt. Day after day, I'd wake up, eat, sit around doing nothing, and then eat some more. The weight piled on quickly, and so did the shame. I avoided mirrors because I hated what I saw, and my clothes barely fit anymore. But despite all of this, I convinced myself that Arthur would stay with me, that even though I was falling apart, he would love me enough to see past it all. I was wrong. One day, after yet another argument where I made some offhand remark about his hands and feet, a joke that had become a habit by then, Arthur told me to leave. There was no dramatic explosion, no heated shouting match. He simply said I had no right to stay in his house anymore, that he was done with the belittling, the weight gain, and everything else. He didn't want to fix anything between us. He was finished. I didn't even see it coming. I had convinced myself that we were still trying to work things out, that if I just gave him a little more space we could patch things up. But the truth was Arthur had already checked out. He wasn't interested in repairing what had been broken. He just wanted me gone. With nowhere else to go, I went back to my parents' house. I thought they'd be there for me, offer me the support I desperately needed. But the reception I got was far from the warm embrace I had hoped for. They let me stay, but there was no sympathy, no understanding. They didn't see me as their broken, heartbroken daughter, just as someone who had failed in every aspect of her life. I was jobless, overweight, and completely lost. And instead of helping me heal, they made it clear that they thought this was my fault. It wasn't just my parents, either. Everyone seemed to take Arthur's side. My friends, my family. It was like they had all decided that I was the villain in the story of my own life. They praised Arthur, saying how patient he had been, how he had put up with so much from me. My parents even told me that I didn't deserve him, that I had let myself go and driven him away. It was as if my feelings didn't matter, as if the pain I was going through wasn't real to them. They even continued inviting Arthur over for dinners, treating him like he was still part of the family while I was the one who had been cast out. The worst part was when I started to complain, when I tried to make them see how much I was hurting. They didn't want to hear it. My parents eventually told me that I was causing too much trouble, that I was being selfish for not getting over it, for not moving on. And then, just like Arthur had, they kicked me out too. I had nowhere to go, no friends to turn to, no one who would take me in. I ended up in homeless shelters, barely scraping by from day to day, living in a reality I never imagined for myself. It feels like a bad dream, one I'm constantly hoping to wake up from. But the days keep passing and nothing changes. I hate myself for letting things get this bad, for not seeing what was happening in my relationship sooner, for not being able to save myself before everything crumbled. I hate Arthur for abandoning me, for throwing me away when I needed him the most. And I hate my parents for choosing him over me, for deciding that I was the problem and not standing by me. Now I'm just drifting. I don't know how to pull myself out of this hole. Every day is a reminder of how far I've fallen, of how everything I once had is gone. I feel like I'm screaming into a void, desperate for someone to listen, for someone to care. But no one does. I'm all alone, and I don't know how to climb out of the mess that my life has become. Update. Hey Reddit. Well, that wasn't exactly the response I was hoping for. I knew the internet could be harsh, but the comments from my last post were more brutal than I expected. I wasn't asking for pity, but a little civility wouldn't have hurt. Instead, I got told I deserved everything that happened, which honestly stung more than I want to admit. I don't know how so many people came to that conclusion, but hey, that's the internet for you. When I posted before, I was mostly venting. I just wanted to scream into the void and get everything off my chest. I wasn't looking for a magic solution or a life lesson, just a moment to breathe. But since so many of you asked for an update, here it is. Spoiler alert. It's not a happy one. I got served with divorce papers. That's it. It's official now. There wasn't some grand realization on Arthur's part. No moment where he came back begging for forgiveness or even any closure for me. He's moved on. He's dating someone else now. And from what I can see on their socials, yes, I'm stalking them. They seem really happy. I hate to admit it, but I check their profiles more than I should. A lot more, actually. Every time I scroll through their pictures, it feels like twisting the knife in my own wound. But I can't stop myself. It's like I'm torturing myself on purpose, watching his new life unfold while I'm stuck in this mess. And here I am, utterly alone. People keep telling me that they deserve to be happy, that I should just move on, and that I'm making too big a deal out of everything, that I'm the one who screwed things up and that it's all my fault. Maybe they're right. I don't know. But is it really too much to ask for someone to understand how messed up this whole situation feels? I'm angry, I'm hurt, and I'm lost. Yet no one seems to care. Every day I wake up hating myself a little more. I can't stand the person I see in the mirror. I've hit rock bottom emotionally, physically, financially. I'm broke, overweight, unwanted, and homeless. And no, this isn't just a rough patch. This is my life now, and I can't even begin to imagine how I'll climb out of it. I've been searching for jobs, but it's not exactly going well. It's not like there's a long line of employers waiting to hire me. I've been trying to find something that includes housing, like a live-in housekeeper or caretaker position. But those are hard to come by, especially when you're not in the best shape physically or mentally. Even if I did manage to find one, I feel like I'm just sinking deeper into this hole I found myself in. There's no light at the end of the tunnel right now. No silver lining, no grand comeback story waiting to happen. I wish I could end this update with something hopeful, but I can't. I'm just here, trying to get through each day, wondering how my life went so wrong so fast. So yeah, that's the update. Nothing spectacular, nothing positive, just the harsh reality of where I'm at right now. Thanks for, well, whatever this is. Update. Hey, Reddit. So it's been a long while since I last checked in, and I've got to admit, things are still pretty rough. The other day, while I was sorting through my stuff, I stumbled upon this old note with my Reddit login details scribbled on it. It felt like I'd opened a time capsule from my past, a weirdly nostalgic moment that tugged at my heartstrings. Naturally, I had to log in, and wow, I was hit with a wave of messages and update requests. Apparently, my post even made it onto the best of Redditors updates, and it was marked as inconclusive because I disappeared for so long. Well, here I am now with the update you've all been waiting for, though I wouldn't call it a good one. Let's cut right to the chase. I'm still homeless. Yep, still. That's probably the biggest takeaway here. Karma hasn't shown up to right the wrongs in my life. There are no magical turnarounds or redemption arcs where everyone suddenly gets what they deserve. I'm still here, still struggling, still miserable, still lonely, still obese. Honestly, probably even more than I was last time I posted. Living on the streets is just as hard as you can imagine. Probably harder. There's no safety net, no sense of stability, and every day is just about survival. But there's a tiny silver lining. I did manage to find a job. It's nothing glamorous. Far from it. It's a low-paying dead-end job with long hours. But it does offer a live-in position. The catch? Someone else is occupying the space right now. But they're supposed to move out in a couple of months and then it'll be mine. So right now, I'm just counting down the days until I can finally move in. Thank God for small mercies, right? As for my weight, well, let's just say things haven't improved. I know many of you gave me advice and tips in my last post. Diets, exercise plans, motivational talks, all that. And I really do appreciate it. But honestly, none of it worked. It's gotten worse. I've gained more weight since then. And I don't know if it's the stress, the depression, or just the sheer exhaustion of trying to exist in a life that feels like it's falling apart. But yeah, I'm still obese, still fat, still lonely, still unwanted. The divorce has been finalized and I got nothing from it. Not that I expected much, to be honest. I knew it was coming. I knew I wasn't going to walk away with any financial gain. At least I got to keep my car. So that's something, I guess. Everything else? Gone. I've lost my friends, my family. They never really liked me. I guess this was the final nail in the coffin for them. I broke down at the courthouse when it all became official. There was something so final about it, like every door to the life I used to know was slamming shut in my face. On top of everything, Arthur finally told me why he left. We had a little conversation after the paperwork was signed. He said the teasing was just too much for him. He was tired of feeling like a joke, like he wasn't enough and he was done with it. I guess deep down, I always knew that was the reason. I just never wanted to admit it. Instead, I painted him as the bad guy, and that was easier than facing my own demons. Looking back, I realize how much I let my jealousy consume me. Instead of dealing with it like an adult, I chose to tear him down. I thought making jokes would somehow level the playing field or make me feel better about myself, but all I did was push him away. I see Arthur and his girlfriend now, and they look so happy together. They look beautiful together, like they belong. And I'm still here, hating myself, hating my life, waiting for something to change that never will. And you know what? That's what I've realized most of all. No one is coming to save me. This isn't some Hollywood movie where karma swoops in and punishes the bad guys. There's no grand moment of justice. They're happy and I'm not. And that's just life. I kept holding on to this idea that if I waited long enough, karma would come around and punch them in the face. But it doesn't work like that. They're going to keep living their happy, picture-perfect life, and I have to accept that. No one is going to magically swoop in and make everything better for me. No one is coming to offer me a helping hand. This is my reality now. It's taken me a long time to come to terms with all this, but I finally realized that life isn't a movie. There's no guaranteed happy ending. Sometimes bad things happen.